The bell that rang across Camp Clinton, Mississippi at 8 a.m. on September 15, 1944 wasn't calling prisoners to work detail or roll call. It was summoning them to something that left female German prisoners of war absolutely speechless. Ingrid Müller, a 24-year-old former communications specialist captured during the liberation of France, stood frozen outside a converted barracks building that had been transformed into something she never expected to see in a prisoner of war camp. A fully equipped classroom, complete with blackboards, desks, textbooks, and an American teacher who greeted her with a warm smile and said in perfect German, "Good morning, ladies. Welcome to your first day of school. Today we begin your journey toward building a better future." For women who had been raised under a Nazi regime that strictly controlled education and limited learning opportunities for females, the idea that their American captors would not only allow but actively encourage them to pursue advanced education seemed impossible to believe. Ingrid had grown up in a Germany where women's education was systematically limited by Nazi ideology that insisted females should focus exclusively on motherhood and domestic duties rather than intellectual pursuits or professional careers. The Nazi slogan Kinder, Küche, Kirche, children, kitchen, church, had defined the acceptable boundaries of female existence, and young women who showed academic aptitude were often discouraged or prevented from pursuing higher education that might distract them from their designated role as wives and mothers. University enrollment for German women had actually decreased under Nazi rule, as educational resources were redirected toward military training for men and domestic training for women. The idea that enemy captors would provide educational opportunities that her own government had denied seemed like a cruel joke or elaborate psychological manipulation designed to break down prisoner resistance. But as Ingrid entered the classroom and saw shelves lined with books in multiple languages, laboratory equipment for science classes, and art supplies for creative courses, she began to realize that this educational program was completely genuine and comprehensive in ways that challenged everything she thought she knew about American society and prisoner treatment. The camp school offered courses in English language, American history, mathematics, science, literature, art, music, and even vocational training in skills like typing, bookkeeping, and nursing that could provide career opportunities after the war ended. Professor Margaret Thompson, a former university instructor from Minnesota who had volunteered to teach at the prisoner camp, explained that the educational program was designed to help German women develop the intellectual tools and democratic values necessary to participate in rebuilding a peaceful and prosperous post-war Germany. The scope and quality of educational opportunities available to female German prisoners far exceeded what most of them had experienced even before the war began. Martha Schneider, a former Nazi Party administrator who had managed propaganda distribution in occupied Belgium, found herself enrolled in advanced mathematics and science courses that had been completely unavailable to women in Nazi Germany. She wrote in her hidden diary, "Today I learned about atomic theory and chemical bonding from an American professor who treats me as if I have a mind capable of understanding complex scientific concepts." In Germany, women were told that science was too difficult for our inferior female brains, and that we should focus on household chemistry like cooking and cleaning. Here my captors assume that I can master the same intellectual challenges as any man. The psychological impact of being treated as intellectually capable individuals rather than ideologically limited females was profound and transformative for women who had been systematically underestimated and constrained by Nazi gender ideology. Dr. Thompson and her fellow instructors addressed the female prisoners as students and scholars rather than prisoners or enemies, creating an atmosphere of respect and intellectual dignity that many of the women had never experienced before. Class discussions encouraged critical thinking, independent analysis, and open questioning of authority, intellectual skills that had been actively discouraged in Nazi Germany, where conformity and unquestioning obedience were considered essential feminine virtues. Anna Weber, a former Luftwaffe communications officer who had intercepted Allied radio transmissions for 3 years, discovered a passion for literature and creative writing through the camp's English language program. She had never been allowed to read books by authors condemned by Nazi censors. and her first encounter with works by American writers like Mark Twain and Emily Dickinson opened intellectual horizons she hadn't known existed. These American authors write about freedom of thought, individual conscience, and questioning authority in ways that would have been considered treasonous in Germany, she wrote to her sister. Yet here I am, an enemy prisoner, being encouraged to read these ideas and discuss them openly with my teachers and fellow students. My captors are giving me intellectual freedom that my own government denied. The vocational training programs offered at the camp schools provided practical skills that could lead to economic independence and professional careers, opportunities that had been largely denied to women under Nazi ideology that insisted female fulfillment came only through marriage and motherhood. Elizabeth Hoffman, a former SS administrator, learned typing, shorthand, and business correspondence skills that would enable her to work as a secretary or administrative assistant after returning to Germany. The irony was not lost on her that American captors were preparing her for a professional career while her own government had insisted that women should avoid careers that might interfere with their biological destiny as mothers of future soldiers. The science and mathematics education provided to female prisoners was particularly revolutionary given Nazi claims that women lacked the intellectual capacity for rigorous scientific thinking. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a chemist from the University of Chicago who volunteered to teach at the camp, organized advanced chemistry and physics courses that challenged her German students with the same material she had taught to male university students. Her star pupil was Greta Richter, a former Nazi propaganda artist who discovered an aptitude for mathematics that had never been recognized or encouraged in Germany. Professor Mitchell treats my mind as if it has the same potential as any man's brain, Greta wrote in her journal. She assigns me complex mathematical problems and expects me to solve them independently. This respect for female intellectual capability is something I never experienced in the fatherland. The camp library became a sanctuary of intellectual freedom where female prisoners could read books that had been banned in Nazi Germany and explore ideas that had been considered dangerous to feminine virtue and political loyalty. Works by Jewish authors, democratic philosophers, and feminist writers were freely available, and prisoners were encouraged to read widely and think critically about different political and social systems. Brunhilde Koch, a former teacher who had been forced to teach Nazi racial ideology to German children, spent hours in the library reading about democratic education methods and child psychology. I am learning about teaching methods that encourage children to think for themselves rather than simply memorize state-approved answers, she wrote. These American educational theories assume that even children have minds capable of independent thought, a radical idea. Compared to Nazi educational doctrine, the art and music programs offered creative outlets that had been severely restricted in Nazi Germany, where artistic expression was controlled by state ideology and limited to themes that supported party propaganda. Female prisoners, the historical education provided to female prisoners, offered truthful accounts of recent events that contradicted Nazi propaganda and revealed the extent to which German citizens had been deceived about the war's progress and their nation's actions. Dr. Robert Patterson, a history professor from Columbia University, taught courses on World War II that included documented evidence of Nazi war crimes, the Holocaust, and the true reasons for Germany's defeat. Many female prisoners learned for the first time about the systematic murder of Jews, the aggressive nature of German military expansion, and the lies they had been told about Allied intentions and capabilities. This historical education was emotionally devastating but intellectually liberating for women who finally understood the moral dimensions of the conflict they had supported. The discussions and debates that emerged in camp classrooms created intellectual environments where former Nazi supporters could safely question the ideology they had once embraced without fear of punishment or denunciation. Philosophy and ethics courses led by Dr. Margaret Foster from the University of Chicago encouraged students to examine the moral implications of different political systems and to develop personal ethical frameworks based on reason rather than authority. These philosophical discussions were particularly powerful for women who had been taught that moral thinking was beyond female capabilities, and that ethical questions should be left to male political leaders. The scientific method taught in camp schools provided tools for critical thinking and empirical analysis that directly challenged Nazi reliance on ideology over evidence. Chemistry and biology courses demonstrated how scientific knowledge was developed through observation, experimentation, and logical analysis rather than political decree or racial theory. Dr. Ruth Goldman, a Jewish-American scientist whose own family had fled Nazi Germany, taught courses that included the real science behind Nazi racial pseudoscience, showing how legitimate scientific methods had been corrupted to support political prejudices. Her students learned to distinguish between genuine, scientific knowledge and ideological manipulation, disguised as science. The camp schools also provided opportunities for female prisoners to develop leadership skills and collaborative working relationships that had been discouraged under Nazi gender ideology that emphasized female submission and dependence. Student government organizations allowed prisoners to practice democratic decision-making and to take responsibility for organizing educational and social activities. These leadership experiences were transformative for women who had been taught that decision-making and authority were exclusively male prerogatives unsuited to feminine nature. The POWs, graduation ceremonies held at camp schools, celebrated intellectual achievement and academic excellence in ways that honored female intellectual capabilities and professional aspirations. Elizabeth Muller, who completed advanced courses in accounting and business administration, received her diploma from Professor Thompson with words that would have been impossible in Nazi Germany. Elizabeth, you have demonstrated intellectual rigor, critical thinking skills, and professional competence that will serve you well in whatever career you choose to pursue. Your mind is a powerful tool for building a better future for yourself and your country. These ceremonies marked not just academic completion, but psychological transformation from ideologically limited subjects to intellectually empowered individuals. The correspondence between former students and their American teachers continued long after the war ended, creating lasting intellectual relationships that influenced German educational and social development during the Reconstruction period. Many former prisoners became teachers, social workers, and professionals who applied democratic educational methods and critical thinking skills they had learned in American camp schools. They became advocates for women's education and gender equality in post-war Germany, using their American educational experience as evidence that women could excel in any intellectual field when given proper opportunities and encouragement. The long-term impact of camp school education on German society extended far beyond individual transformation to influence broader cultural attitudes toward women's intellectual capabilities and educational opportunities. Former prisoners who had experienced genuine educational freedom became powerful advocates for democratic educational reform and gender equality in the new German democratic system. Their testimony about American educational methods helped shape post-war German educational policies that emphasized critical thinking over ideological conformity and encouraged educational opportunities for all citizens regardless of gender. The success of camp schools demonstrated the power of education to transform ideological enemies into democratic citizens and allies. Female German prisoners who had entered camps as supporters of Nazi ideology graduated as advocates for democratic values, individual rights, and gender equality. Their intellectual transformation represented one of the most successful denazification and democratization programs of the post-war period, achieving through education what could never have been accomplished through punishment or propaganda. The preserved letters, diaries, and testimonies of former camp school students provide powerful evidence of how educational opportunities could overcome ideological indoctrination and create lasting change in political attitudes and personal values. These documents, now housed in various historical archives, reveal the profound impact of treating enemy prisoners as intelligent individuals capable of growth and change, rather than irredeemable ideological enemies deserving only punishment. Today, the story of camp schools for female German prisoners serves as compelling evidence that education represents humanity's most powerful tool for overcoming hatred, prejudice, and ideological conflict. The American teachers who volunteered to work in prisoner camps and the German women who embraced educational opportunities, despite their circumstances, proved that intellectual engagement across enemy lines could create understanding, respect, and lasting peace between former adversaries. Their example continues to inspire educational programs that use learning and critical thinking to build bridges between different cultures and conflicting worldviews.